got the mic. I'm going to put, I've got two mics on this, and I'll turn your volume up. Okay. All right. So one of the things I'm going to want to talk about is, of course, you know, how you got into this. And I know you work at the zoo there, but you've got a lot of accolades. So how did you get started in this whole thing?
Oh, my goodness. Well, so I've been a lifelong naturalist. As a child, I was really interested in reptiles and amphibians. And I kept that up in college and grad school. And I went off and did various consulting and academic jobs and spent a lot of years basically doing grant-funded research based on sort of my areas of expertise and my personal passions. And I've just been really fortunate that I was able to, you know, parlay that into a position with Texas Parks and Wildlife. I was a state reptile and amphibian biologist for a number of years, which was a wonderful job for someone who studies cave salamanders primarily, because we have 14 or more species right within an hour of my house that are all very deserving of research and conservation efforts. And I was very fortunate. I learned a lot in that job that really positioned me well to do the job I'm doing now as Director of Conservation in the Center for Conservation Research at San Antonio Zoo.
Right, right. Well, I tell you what, the reason that I wanted to talk to you was because I am a member of a historical forum in Plainview, Texas, and growing up, you know, what I remember, you know, probably when I was like 5 years old to probably 10, I remember seeing them things, and that would have been 75 through 80. Okay, we used to catch these. We used to catch them, and like I would play with them because we didn't. I mean, my mom moved us every year, so I had no friends. So my friends ended up being horny toads.
Horny lizards.
You know, and yeah.
Don't blame your circumstances. I think a lot of kids who grew up in that same era, in similar parts of Texas, horned lizards were their best friends too.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I'm finding out. You know, it's like there's yeah, absolutely. You know, I'm finding out there's a lot of people that remember these little critters, you know, and these little critters were so sweet. I mean, people think they're, you know, they talk about them spitting and all this, and I've never had one spit at me. And I suppose you could explain that. With
our Texas horned lizards, you know, every now and again you'll get one that does, or who's just, you know, not scared, or I don't know.
Aren't those more common to extreme South Texas and more Mexico? Those type of horny toads.
Well, I've picked up Phrynosoma azeo down in Nuevo Leon, and they're pretty eager to blood squirt on you out their eyes. And I've actually never had a Texas horned lizard do it to me. Now, of course, we handle them gently and with respect, but yeah, it's not a ubiquitous trick. You know, one would hope that most horned lizards never need to use it in their lifetime.
My goodness, I remember, you know, I would take these things home. You know, I would take the little babies, and I'm displaying all the pictures that your zoo and your media staff sent us.
Yeah.
And so we'll go through all these images, you know, but they're so sweet. I mean, these little creatures are so sweet. But you know, what happened? Why did they start disappearing? Because I remember going back to Plainview. You know, I was probably gone from let's see, about 89 through about 95, and then I came back, and every year, and I started going down to some of the places that I used to see them, and I would go down looking for them, and I couldn't find them anymore. So starting about 95, I'd never seen them again, I think. But what?
Yeah, well, there's a lot to unpack there. So first of all, in most cases, there just simply is, I like to say, there simply is no single smoking gun. But, you know, folks who have had experiences like what you described in Plainview, you know, did Plainview look the same in 95 as when you left in 89?
It really didn't, because, you know, the beef industry went to heck, and that was supposedly the drought, because I think we had one of the biggest beef packing plants in the area, and we had a lot of cattle, and that supposedly that died out as well because of the drought, But I'm not really sure about
drought would play a role in both. But if you look at a lot of places where horned lizards were present, say even into the 80s, like in South Austin or parts of San Antonio, there's no place to put a horned lizard these days. Yeah. It's either single family housing or some other sort of infrastructure, strip malls, the whole nine.
Yeah.
It's a creeping threat that we see, obviously, when things go from open spaces and one story to no open spaces and multi-story buildings. But horned lizards feel that at a much finer scale than we do when you go from native grasses and bunch grasses and forbs that are grazed by livestock or wildlife to expanses of non-native invasive grasses that don't have that pressure to keep them thinned out, so horned lizards can live their life in that. They feel that right away, where we might just notice that it's a field.
Yeah.
Those little components are so important to an animal. It lives its life 1 inch off the ground. They change without us noticing. And so getting back to, there's no single smoking gun. Well, if you look at all the other threats that have been described as potential factors in the decline or the disappearance of horned lizards in different places, fire ants, they get a lot of blame and they deserve it. They're terrible for horned lizards and other terrestrial organisms by and large. But they're not what started it.
Yeah.
And they're part of the reason now why it may be difficult for horned lizards to come back on a piece of property, because it's got an imbalance of fire ants versus native ants and things. But also keep in mind that when horned lizards started to blink out from places, say starting in the 50s with the widespread over application of pesticides like DDT and post-war conversion to really industrial agriculture and the urbanization of a lot of Texas, that horned lizards, if they blink out from a place, they're not likely to come back. They're not like the harvest ants that they depend on.
Yeah.
Send up hundreds of reproductive individuals that fly off somewhere else. If a horned lizard's got to get there, it's got to walk on inch-long legs.
Yeah.
So, that said, they're still doing well in parts of the state, especially in South Texas, the Panhandle, and West Texas. There are places where they're doing fine. A lot of places are not doing as well as they used to, but once again, none of those places are immune to any of the factors that you and I have talked about.
Yeah.
So just different.
What do they feed on? Is it ants?
Primarily the native harvester ants. So the harvester ants are the ones that they make a big round gravel apron around the entrance to their colonies.
Yeah.
The queens are very long lived. She could be laying eggs every day for 10 or 15 or more years.
Yeah, that is a trip,
Yeah, and it's just one queen, hundreds. Yeah.
I worked for one summer for Orkin when I was about 22, and I studied carpenter ants and their habits and so forth. But they feed on these ants. Where do they go in the wintertime? Because in Plainview, I remember some winters where it was absolutely brutally cold. How do they survive?
And, so the Texas horned lizard, its historic range goes all the way up into Missouri and Kansas.
Yeah.
Other species of horned lizard ranges all up into southern Canada. So they've got tricks for it. Horned lizards, when it's cold out, they generally will bury down into loose soil or into leaf litter. That's why it's important to have sort of shelter shrubs and trees that create some of that environment in that mosaic landscape that they depend on. That's a good place for them to hide from predators, but also to get out of the heat of the day. And then, of course, the bitter cold of winter. For a cold-blooded animal like a horned lizard, winter's a pretty rough period. And so what they'll do is they'll hibernate in the polar bear sense of it, but they'll basically go into a winter torpor after they've buried themselves down into a safe spot. That's what they're doing in Plainview, even as cold as it gets.
So they're actually burrowing down underground somewhere then, right?
Yeah, not very deep, just a few inches.
Wow.
And a blanket over them.
I don't want to call them horny toads. I know that. Is there a stigma with that? Because everybody I know calls them horny toads.
They go by a lot of names, and people ask me that question all the time. I call them horny toad, or my wife who went to TCU, she calls them horned frogs, or he calls them a horned lizard. What is it? And I don't care. Those are all terms of endearment.
Yeah.
That little reptile has so many pet names, so many nicknames. It just tells you how much Texans love it. Getting back to your personal story, I've heard stories similar to yours countless times.
Yeah.
So their absence is something that's really deeply felt by a lot of people. And mostly it's people my age or older who grew up in a certain part of Texas.
Yeah.
But it's not exclusive to them.
Yeah.
People miss this charismatic little iconic lizard, and they want it back. And
right.
It's very, very clear that this one organism has been a very, very important component of many, many people's childhood memories.
Yeah, absolutely. And they are so sweet. They are a very sweet creature. People don't realize how sweet they are.
Yeah.
I used to lay them on their back and just kind of rub their belly, and they would just lay there and kind of squint just loving it,
Yeah.
And but I have another question for you, not related to horny toads, but there was another little critter that we used to catch. I think we called them water dogs or something like that. But what's really freaky, and I don't know if I just dreamed this or if it really happened. I was a little kid, but I seem to remember catching them by their tails, and then they would, the tail would break off, and then they would grow another one right there on the spot. Did I imagine that, or is that possible?
You imagine that part.
Okay.
So there are a bunch of things wrapped up in that story. So water dogs can refer to a bunch of different aquatic salamanders or the larvae, aquatic larvae of terrestrial salamanders. Your part of the state, that people might be referring to basically the quote-unquote tadpole, the aquatic larval form of a tiger salamander.
Well, I just remember, the only place I remember seeing those things was down in the Plainview apartment pond. There's a pond in that middle of the town there. The next question I have for you, Andy, is I know that I would like to get, if I could have one as a pet. Is that possible for civilians to own these things now? Because I heard that there was a felony involved if you capture one.
Yeah, so in the state of Texas, the Texas horned lizard is state listed as threatened. So it's a threatened species in Texas. That means you can't catch them, kill them, trade them, breed them, sell them, skin them, any of that stuff. You can take pictures.
Yeah.
The laws vary by state, but suffice to say it's illegal to sell any horned lizard from Texas anywhere. I'm not sure what the laws are for this species in all the states where it occurs, but really, and I'm glad you asked this question. In this case, I feel that the law serves a really good purpose. And that's simply the fact that these things are darn near impossible to keep in captivity for any length of time.
Right.
We have a team of trained professionals. We have incredible vet staff. I have all the resources that the zoo provides, and we find it quite challenging, and so do other zoos. Little Timmy, who gets one for $25 at the vet shop and brings it home in a goldfish bowl, is going to have a really terrible weekend next week when he has to go and bury it. And that's more by history. It used to be that you could look in the back of comic books and magazines, and you could buy horned lizards through the mail, just like monkeys or...
Oh, yeah. Those were great.
Yeah, and so there was, decades and decades ago, there's a cottage industry catching horned lizards, not just in Texas, but Oklahoma and elsewhere, and shipping them out. But, it's one of those pets that, you better keep the receipt because it's not going to make it. And part of that is that, as we discussed earlier, their diet. So in the wild, they eat on average about 2/3 of their diet is harvester ants. So those particular ants, not fire ants, none of that. Particular species of ant, and they'll eat dozens or even hundreds per day. So that's a lot of ants. We actually struggle to supply as many ants as we need, both by purchasing them from a commercial ant provider and going out and vacuuming up our own ants.
Wow.
Even with a team of people who are dedicated to this, it's a full-time job.
Yeah, because you would almost have to have somebody that can actually sit there and get another queen to start another colony. I mean, I imagine that would be amazing, just trying to keep them going.
When I looked at our ant bills when I started this project, I said to myself, well, we're going to start breeding these. This is crazy. Well, it turns out harvester ants are some of the slowest producing ants you'll ever find. And we tried doing exactly what you just mentioned. And after a year, our best queen, our most prolific queen, had 40 daughters.
Wow.
So that wouldn't get a horned lizard through lunch.
Right. It's amazing.
That's another reason to respect the harvester ant mounds. I tell people they're like low-lying oak trees, right? If you have a nice big live oak on your ranch or in your yard, you're not going to go run it over with your truck or pour gas on it or do whatever to it. You're going to respect it. And really, it's the same with harvester ants in that they're really important for their communities. They're really long-lived. They don't cause any harm. We should treat them with respect.
You'll respect them for sure if you're a little kid and you go out there and you start playing in them pits like I used to do. I'd come in and I'd have 100 bites, and my mom would just put camphofenique on me and tell me to go outside and play. And
Yeah, they're they got bad bites.
Oh boy, it feels like somebody burned a match into your skin, is what it feels like.
I feel like they deserve a different kind of respect.
Absolutely. What can we as people do to help these critters come back?
Horned lizards really depend on native habitats. So native plant communities, grasses, forbs, shrubs, trees that support native insects and other wildlife. So it's not some magic secret trick for horned lizards. They like the same thing that a lot of other Texas wildlife need. So we can all do that on some small scale. I know a lot of people, they might not even have a yard. So maybe they can't make a difference, on a large scale, but we can all do something. Definitely hold off on using those broad spectrum pesticides.
Yeah, right.
Ant killers like Amdro, unfortunately, they kill every ant. So they're not specific to fire ants. And if people put them on a fire ant mound, the fire ants a lot of times will carry that. They don't like that bait on their mound, that they'll carry it away where other ants find it. It's fine if you kill a couple of fire ant mounds that you weren't intending to. It's terrible if you kill a harvester ant mound because it's not coming back. Things that everybody can do. So, our project, the Texas Horned Lizard Reintroduction Project, is entirely supported by grants and donations. And so I encourage people, put your money where your mouth is, put your money where your heart is. Go on the San Antonio Zoo webpage, click under conservation. That folks can read about the project and other projects. We have donate buttons right there. So So that's a very close to home way that people.
That's a way that people can directly to put their, if they really want to see, these things come back and they got, that it's a little bit of extra money, it'd be great if they could,
Yep, every single penny goes straight to that.
Because that's all you guys taking care of them creatures. You're having to feed them day in, day out. Now the other question I had for you is it a big difference for you guys to take care of them there in mid, the middle part of Texas versus the guys in Dallas up there at the Texas University or wherever they're at? Have you heard anything about your progress versus their progress in Dallas, or has that come up ever? Or?
So we're the most recent horned lizard reintroduction effort here in Texas. Fort Worth Zoo and Dallas Zoo have been working with Texas Parks and Wildlife for a number of years. I was involved in that when I was the state reptile guy. And so we're really fortunate to sort of be the most recent player to the table, because we're able to learn from everyone's successes and failures and hopefully get off to a better start. And so I'm really, really thankful to these other programs that have been, putting in the long hours and learning what works and what doesn't work, so that efforts like ours can get off to a better beginning. So
yeah,
you're asking about what are there husbandry differences? There are. So first of all, we're working with the southern genetic form, which is basically like San Antonio South. Yeah. And those programs are working with the northern genetic form. So it would have been like Austin North. And of course, far south Texas, there's usually what you would call a real winter down there. Lizards have actually been documented active 12 months of the year. You can imagine, like you were saying earlier, in North Texas, particularly in the Panhandle, those are long, hard winters, and lizards have kind of a long, forced downtime. So you can imagine South Texas, North Texas lizards are adapted. Some of the husbandry approaches that have been used, say, to overwinter northern lizards just didn't work with our southern lizards. And so, once again, we're always adjusting how we do things to try and improve outcomes. That we basically try to mimic winter conditions that they would experience.
Absolutely. That is one of the freakiest things I've ever seen, Andy. I was living in Minnesota for 20 years of my life. I've seen a lot of squirrels, okay? Up in Minnesota, you will actually see black squirrels. I moved to Iowa, lived in Iowa for 5 years, and I seen white squirrels. And I don't know, or it could be the other way around. It may have been the white ones up in Minnesota and the black ones in Iowa.
White squirrels in Austin, like on the UT campus, there's some famous ones, and they're leucistic. It's just a genetic.
Okay, it's not anything to do with their environment, like they turn, because they're seeing snow all the time, they start turning into.
Except that you can imagine a lot of places other than maybe the middle of the university campus, a white squirrel isn't going to last too long in the wild.
Right. Because the stronger weed out the weaker, and they're more susceptible to being seen, right, by predators, right? Is that more the...
Exactly. Yeah. Good luck hiding in the ground of a tree when the hawk's looking for you.
Right on, yeah. Another critter that we had a lot of, and we talk a lot about on our forum, straight out of Plainview, is cicadas. Because growing up, I remember waking up to, and they would aggravate us because you'd wake up to waking from a sleep into a trance, and you're waking up to these waves.
All around.
Yeah, they chitter and chatter together in unison. It's the craziest thing if people haven't heard it.
Well, we have there's many species of cicadas here in North America, and not all of them do that. And then the ones that do, that make this din in spring and summer, they're on different cycles. So, you've heard of 17-year cicadas like in the Midwest, the Northeast, and there's 12 and I think 19 and 14 and all these different cycles of cicadas. So depending on what cicada is in your area and where you are in those multi-year cycles, you might wind up with negligible cicada seasons or ear-splitting cicada seasons.
And that must have been, the same thing, because this was in, mid 70s to early 80s that this kind of stuff was going on in Plainview, and I mean, I remember, and I kid you not, Andy, we used to go out and catch them, right, and put them, I mean, I don't want to say what people did, but it wasn't nice, but they were so abundant and they were so just aggravating because but they would wake you up, they would but we would go catch them and put them in bags, and I mean, you could 5 or 6 guys could go down the street and come back in an hour and have 200 or 300 of them in a bag. And
good bait.
Yeah, right. So that's, do you feel like that is also part of all this pesticide stuff? Because and that's the other question I was going to ask you. We sprayed in Plainview for years. They sprayed for mosquitoes. Is that part of this thing too, do you think?
Well, it depends what they sprayed. And like I said, there's no single smoking gun. There's a lot of reasons why you might see a decline or disappearance of cicadas, like changing the types of trees planted or the density of them, that sort of thing. So in my area, they really like oaks.
Weird, yeah. Well, I haven't seen them things for, ever, but every once in a while I have seen them up in Iowa. I've seen, a few of their carcasses here at my house. I've seen a few of them where they, I don't know, I guess they shed. They come out of the ground as a worm. They come out of the ground
and then they molt into the adult form once they get by a tree trunk or the wall of your house or something.
Yeah, and that's, as a matter of fact, that's where I remember seeing them things come out of the ground, white larva-looking things with beady eyes, and then next thing you know, you're seeing that shell thing, that they leave behind. It's so cool. But yeah, well, Andy, thank you so much for your time.
Hey, great talking to you, man.
And I will put something together, a package together that you guys can also distribute, and we can cross-disseminate some information about the zoo and helping with this, getting these critters back, getting the numbers back. I want to see these things thriving again.
That'd be wonderful.
Thank you so much, Andy, and thank the zoo for me.
Yeah, shortly, we're going to roll out an online horned lizard advocate guide, horned lizard advocacy guide, that will have resources for all different types of horned lizard advocates. And so we're going to have that resource out real soon.
That would be awesome. Keep in touch.
Well, man, thanks for telling the story.
Thank you so much, Andy. You have a wonderful rest of your weekend.
You too, man. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.